Happy Pride Day, Broadway United Church of Christ. It's an honor to be here with you via Zoom from my home in Oakland, California. And I want to thank you for your many years of witness on important, significant social issues as a spiritual community. You stood for abolition, for suffrage, for civil rights, for inclusion. All of these are part of your history, and it's no surprise that you celebrate Pride Day, LGBTQ Pride Day, as part of the rhythm of your spiritual life. You are not a building. You are the church of the future. And you have demonstrated this throughout the years of your ministry. You don't require a building because you're a community that embraces liberation, celebration, not just open and affirming, but celebration of LGBTQ people. Most churches who are gathering today are not celebrating Pride Day as part of their liturgical life. It's not an electionary. It's not even on liberal church calendars particularly. But I want to lift it up to you specifically as a day that has political significance, of course, but also great spiritual significance that I hope we can discover today as we spend time with the gospel. You know, you are not only the Broadway church, but you are also the Broadway United Church of Christ. And we are the denomination that says the things that other people refer to euphemistically. We say it out loud. We are opposed to outright discrimination and to systemic racism. And so we boldly say, without any equivocation, Black Lives Matter. And we are the church that also celebrates the inclusion of LGBTQ people, not quietly on the side, but really celebrates our presence there. We say the words lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, allies, GLBTQ plus. We are not the denomination that shies away from an expanding definition. We're the denomination that says we welcome it in order to fully live into our vision. So it's an honor to be here today on Pride Day. Freedom Day it has different names in different places, emphasizing different nuances. Also, you're in New York. How cool is that? I'm a New York expatriate. I went to college at Columbia University, and my early years of liberation work were formed in New York City. Many of us who live out here, as we say, who are expatriates of New York, part of the diaspora living in California and other places, refer affectionately to New York as the old country. But I think of you not as the old country, but as the new country, the place where innovation continues to happen. So what an honor to be here, to returning to the place of my roots. I also want to say this, what an honor it is to be preaching at the church where Reverend Michael Piazza is the pastor, and where David Plunkett is also in ministry. I've known David for many years, and I've known Michael for 40 years. And I knew Bill Ure. Some of you may have met him, some of you may not, but he continues to be a positive influence in the ministry that you are experiencing. Michael, so that it doesn't go unsaid, did something amazing. He took a thriving spiritual community with a great history already, and by working side by side with people using spiritual principles, helped it to become what it still is today, the largest LGBTQ church in the world, a true cathedral. And he did that because he dreams big, he thinks big, he has a strong ego, and you need that to dream big. And I want to acknowledge that genius, because I know that it's going to help you as you continue to work together in another exciting chapter in the history of Broadway UCC. But I also want to say this, he has a big dream, but he's able to achieve it because he has an equally big heart. I've experienced it myself when at a time of difficulty in my own life, after my HIV diagnosis, and I was feeling pretty bad, to be honest, physically and otherwise, Michael sought me out. He was half a world away. This is before cell phones, and called me up and assured me of his unswerving friendship and loyalty to me, even though I was going through a difficult time. I couldn't see my own future. And Michael helped me to see the future that I forgot to have. So he's been that way for me. He's the person you want nearby in difficult times and in good times, in sickness and in health. So what a great combo. Uh, I know that you're going to do great things together, as you already have. So, Pride Day, let's pray. God, Goddess, Mother and Father of us all, thank you for gathering us together on Pride Day so that we can not only acknowledge this as an historical moment, but also claim it as a day of spiritual liberation and promise for us and for the world. Guide us in our worship together today. Bless us, bring us closer to you and closer to each other. In Jesus' name, Jesus, the waymaker, the revolutionary, the liberator, and the lover of us all. And in the name of everything holy, amen. So today we have this little snippet of a gospel from Matthew 10, 40 to 42. I have an Episcopalian colleague, Dr. Jay Johnson, who's preaching today. And as we were talking about the lectionary readings, he said, well, the gospel is a little thin, is what we came to, because it isn't a great story. Wasn't a story that might necessarily be adapted easily to Pride Day, but it is a principle, and it's a principle of liberation. This comes at the very end. It's kind of random verses in Matthew's gospel of a whole section of Jesus's teaching that really are, that he uses at the beginning to send people off to become part of a movement. He recognizes that if there's going to be change, it can't be limited to just him. It can't be a personality-based ministry. It has to be something that everyone embodies together. So he sends people out on a mission. And these verses come at the very end. And they're great because I think for us on Pride Day, because Pride Day is not just a historical commemoration, which we'll talk about in a moment, but it is also a blueprint for a future. And the principles that Jesus proclaims here are useful to us to remember. He says to them, you know, if they receive you, they receive me. There's nothing that he did that they can't do. And in fact, they're going to know about the Jesus movement, the revolutionary movement in religion and society because of them. And he assures them of this. And he says, you know, some of you will see you as prophets, and that will have some of its own rewards. Others will see you in other, perhaps less exalted ways. But remember, we are stand for something together. And that will sustain us in difficult times. And then the very last phrase, he reminds them of the importance of paying attention to the material circumstances as well as the spiritual circumstances of people when he addresses the virtue of providing a cup of cold water. He says, and whoever gives even a cup of cold water to one of these little ones in the name of a disciple, truly I tell you, none of these will lose their reward. A cup of cold water represents not just an act of kindness, but an acknowledgement of the importance of changing material circumstances. Our religion, our Christian religion, is not just about preparing for the life to come, though it is that, and I believe it firmly. It is equally importantly about making heaven on earth, heaven here and now, not just in the future. So Jesus gives them their marching orders with a particular attention to looking at people's material circumstances and providing for the relief of even the little ones. There are no little ones in the realm of heaven. Everybody counts. Everybody's life is of significance to the one who counts every hair on our heads and is aware of even the falling of a single sparrow. That's the principle. Here's the specific. On Pride Day, because of these principles, we acknowledge and say, especially on Pride Day this year, Black Lives Matter. Unequivocally, without hesitation, We know it to be true, and we stand together. You know, in the early years of the gay rights marches that I would go to in New York, um, we had chants that we did: 2, 4, 6, 8. Gay is just as good as straight. 3, 5, 7, 9. Lesbians are mighty fine. 2, 4, 6, 8. Gay is just as good as straight. Gay, straight, black, white. Same struggle, same fight. Now, I cringe at the simplicity of that right now, but I raise it to remind us that from the very beginning of what we celebrate on Pride Day was an awareness of the twin evils of racism and homophobia, and I would say sexism too. Those things were intertwined principles, and we celebrated them, and we need to celebrate them today even more clearly. On this day, we recall the 6 nights in 1969, when a group of people who were at the Stonewall Inn in Washington Square in Greenwich Village fought back against the police and were unafraid to break the law because the law was unjust. And we know now that it was a group of, a complex group that included racial and gender diversity. Marsha P. Johnson, a name that has come in more recent years to be identified as a leader, even when in the earlier years, the true composition of the group was obscured. We owe the legacy of what we celebrate, those 6 days of unrest, those fabled 6 days that have been told over and over, and sometimes in different and conflicting versions, to a group of people who had not even always been esteemed in what we call the gay movement, or what we called at the time. Racially diverse, many genders. This is who brought us Stonewall. And though Stonewall was not the only rebellion against the legal authorities, when I moved to California, I was quickly corrected and reminded that we had Compton's Cafeteria 2 years earlier, where transgender people fought back, and and I became aware of other unrests as well that were part of this whole revolution, really, where gay people previously in the shadows stepped out into the light, and we stood up proudly and proclaimed, we are who we are, and we are God's children, particularly among religious people. So it wasn't the only one, but it was a significant one, and it was one that was a unifying story that sparked other kinds of reactions, rebellions, revolutions. We honor the event of the Stonewall. We know it had an impact. And there are certain iconographic memories associated with it. You've seen accounts where several, and these are the words they use, drag queens, would dance together in the face of police bullets. We are the village girls. We wear our hair in curls. We wear our sweaters tight. We give the guys a fight. Allen Ginsberg, the great beatnik poet, was nearby and was interviewed that night as he observed what was taking place. And he said, you know, we're one of the largest minorities in this country. It's time we do something to assert ourselves. And then he added wistfully, the guys were so beautiful that night. They'd lost that wounded look. Something did happen then that affects us still, and it's worth remembering on Pride Day. But something larger was at work as well. It wasn't just about what happened in one bar with a group of people. It was about what was sparked communally, the kind of people that needed to hear at the beginning of this revolution the principles that Jesus issued in that gospel snippet that we had at the beginning, the importance of being a movement in solidarity with each other, and also a movement that paid attention to the material circumstances as well as the spiritual circumstances of people. It wasn't enough to affirm people's internal and inherent dignity and worth. We also must work together to provide for equality in every way, in race, class, gender. This is the Stonewall moment that becomes a Stonewall movement. You know, I was a teenager, literally, in the 70s, had come from Royal Oak, Michigan, to study at Columbia University. And I was swept up in what was happening just a few years later. Not that year, but 76, 77 were the years of my first involvement. And it was a very political time, a very exciting time to be young and to be gay in New York. My first political activities were going door to door in Levittown, New York, gathering signatures for the Equal Rights Amendment, which failed to pass, but still was an important aspect. Gay liberation and feminist liberation were intertwined with each other in those years. And I remember my first gay pride march was 76 or 77, and I'm pretty sure we marched from Greenwich Village up Fifth Avenue to Central Park for the rally. Some of my friends have challenged this memory, but I'm pretty sure that's true. Because I remember at one point in the 30s, maybe, looking downward because of the gentle descent of Fifth Avenue to Washington Square and seeing it filled with gay people, and looking up and seeing Fifth Avenue also filled. And I thought, I had no idea there were so many of us. Now, we used to say at the time, where'd they all go the next day? Because in those years, it was more common for people to turn out in large numbers once a year, but it was difficult to sustain the movement. But still, even those one-day events charged us up and made us so proud that we were forever changed in a way that you can't go back into a closet once you started to step out of it. I remember the first time I passed St. Patrick's Cathedral on a gay pride day, and it was surrounded by dozens and dozens, maybe 100 or more policemen who were protecting it from the gays as we walked by. You know, we joked interminably in those years. What, are they afraid we're going to go in and redecorate? Because even these large crowds were very peaceful. They weren't violent. They were full of love and pride, and you could feel it, the optimism. That's what it meant, Pride Day in those years for many of us. I was part of a small church in Greenwich Village that meets at 13th Street and 7th Avenue, the MCC Church. Now it's called Church in the Village. And we gathered on Sunday nights for communion in our t-shirts and blue jeans, dressed in our best t-shirts and our best blue jeans, because that's all we would wear in those days. And we had communion, and I met people who were much older than me, who lived a pre-Stonewall life and who couldn't believe the changes that they were seeing. Albert, a man then in his 70s, who told me about how what it was like to be gay in New York in the 30s, going to the opera. That's where you met other gays, he said, standing room at the opera. And he attended a church on 46th Street between 6th and 7th Avenue, St. Mary the Virgin, that he said the priest there would perform gay wedding ceremonies in the 30s, privately. And he just couldn't believe how open everything was. There was a young man named Norman whose parents had forcibly committed him because of his homosexuality, though he was a brilliant music student at Juilliard. And because of electroshock therapy, ended up with his brain so affected by it that he lived on the streets, but he would come into the MCC church on Sunday nights and play the piano. He could barely communicate, and he was afraid of men. But he found a sanctuary, a safe place to play the piano and make beautiful music and still speak of the inner beauty that they could not take away from him. You know, gay people were forcibly committed. Parents had the right to do that, even to adults. Lesbians lost their children. This was our Holocaust before AIDS, even, just by being accused of being a lesbian. Women lost their children and were not able to see them until they became adults, and many lost contact with them altogether. These were difficult times. Pride meant that we were willing to take risks in order to be ourselves. And our Christianity, in my case and in the case of many others, was what nurtured this pride. We found meaning in his teachings of the life of Jesus that previously were used. The Bible was used as a book of oppression for our people. We took it back and said, no, we're in this book, and this book is not meant to oppress us. And we found the key to our liberation by finding ourselves in the Bible stories. I remember those days because I learned something that has served me my whole life long. And on Pride Day, I want to lift it up to you. What is your place of passion that will cause you, because you are so moved by the material circumstances of others, to break the law if necessary in order to bring about liberation? Those were the days when we never thought about getting a permit for a gay pride parade. You know, a couple 100,000 gay people just showed up, and it was too many to pick off one by one. That principle is one that I think is an important one for us to resurrect today. As we see people in the streets marching for Black Lives Matter, this is what it looks like today, just as that's what it looked like then. We're part of a lineage. We in the LGBT liberation movement learned how to protest and how to engage in change by participating in and by observing the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s. Bayard Rustin, who was the gay organizer, African-American organizer of the March on Washington, the logistics guy, who was kept somewhat in the shadows because of his known homosexuality, spoke these words when he was allowed to speak after he actually convened all these people. For just a minute at the march, he said, "The first demand is that we have effective civil rights legislation, no compromise, and that it include public accommodations, decent housing, integrated education, and the right to vote." The passion of that march got translated into the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And just a week ago, our Supreme Court affirmed that LGBT people have protections under the law because of that Civil Rights Act. There's a direct line from the March on Washington to the words of Bayard Rustin, to the actions of the president in 1964, President Johnson, when he signed the Civil Rights Act, to the decision that was rendered last week by the Supreme Court. Black Lives Matter and Gay Pride Day are deeply intertwined, not just legally, but morally and ethically too. This is the legacy we have to claim and live into continually. Jesus issued these marching orders as if he could envision what we would need to hear today, when he said to them, when they see you, they'll see me. And when they see you together, they'll see a force of love they can't possibly resist or overcome. It may take a long time, but if you keep the big picture, you can achieve it. And he reminded them of the importance, again, by using that little image of providing even the littlest ones with a cup of water, that liberation is always both material and spiritual. What good is it if we don't achieve equality in the very categories that Bayard Rustin named? We have to stand in solidarity with each other. This is what I think pride means today. You know, just last night, there was a court ruling in California. Judge Dolly G said this, that right now, the children who are in detention in ICE detention prisons must be released in the next 3 weeks because, quote, the family residential centers are on fire and there is no time for half measures. And she was referring to the fact that in ICE detention, as is true in prisons, across all kinds of prisons across the country, very little attention is being paid to the spread of the coronavirus and what must be done to preserve the health of people living in these circumstances. It's so desperate that she has ordered the immediate release of all of these little ones in order that they might live. And I hope that we have an equal passion that says, not just the children, but set them free. Hashtag set them free, set them all free. adults too. This is part of our liberation commitment on Pride Day. We see this in the Black Lives Matter movement. We see it and feel it, and we know it to be true. And we also know that even the struggle for LGBT rights is not over. What happened just a week ago, this week also, when the government decreed that through HHS, there were no innate protections against discrimination for transgender people in healthcare. This has got to be all of our concern. This year, trans lives have also to matter, and Black trans lives in particular. Don't let us be separated. Don't separate these strands. They're all important. You know, in the days of my youth, I don't want to sound like the old guy just musing about the past. I'm hoping that this motivates us to think about all of us collectively, gay and straight together, what it is that we can achieve in solidarity with each other. But in those days, we used to sing the songs of musicals as if they were also religious songs. I'm thinking particularly of There's a Place for Us, Somewhere, from West Side Story. You know, it had lyrics by Bernstein and music by Sondheim. And we would sing with aspiration. There's a place for us, a time and place for us. Peace and quiet and open air wait for us somewhere. There's a time for us. Time together with time to spare, time to learn, time to care. Someday, somewhere. You know, during the AIDS years, that became particularly poignant when we learned to care for each other as part of this legacy of sticking with each other through even difficult circumstances. Harry Condolian was a New York playwright, and he said in one of his plays at the he was quoted in his New York Times obituary, saying, "Please do not feel sorry for me. I go someplace thrilling." And that was our hope then. Someday, somewhere, but not just in the life to come, here and now. Someday, somewhere, Pride Day, right now. Thank you, Broadway Church, for letting me be here today. And please be assured of my prayers for your prosperity and your liberation work in the future. Amen.